Let's kick it off with what the latest is in Chicago, where it appears the teachers just refuse to teach. They just won't.
Yeah, look, they decided to close school for another day today, and this is the fourth day of school closures. They're holding children's education hostage nearly 2 years into this, since this all started, and there's no excuse for it now. Every other business essentially has been able to figure it out. Private schools and daycares were somehow magically able to be open essentially the entire time. Grocery stores were able to be open essentially the entire time. And I think the problem here is that the main difference is one of incentives, that in the private sector, the schools and every business understands that their customers can take their money elsewhere. When it comes to the public school teachers unions, they get your money regardless of whether they open their doors for business. So they fight as hard as possible to keep their doors closed in order to secure additional ransom payments from the taxpayer in perpetuity. It's a never-ending cycle, and we're seeing that play out in Chicago, where look, in Chicago, they've already received $2.8 billion, over $8,000 per student in Chicago since March of 2020 in federal, quote unquote, COVID relief that really had nothing to do with safety from the beginning of all of this. It's really had to do more with politics and power than anything else. And they're still closed because they figured out that they can use the closures as leverage to get even more money. And look, they're going to continue doing this. And I think the only way to get out of this problem is to fund the student directly. Chicago spends over $27,000 per student per year now, according to their 2022 budget. Average private school tuition is only about $11,000 in Chicago. Why not give most, if not all, of that funding to the parent and let them figure it out? That's the only way I think you get out of this, so that the school actually has an incentive from the bottom up to cater to the needs of families as opposed to the other way around.
That is amazing. $2.8 billion in federal COVID funding from the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund just to Chicago public schools alone. So what did they do with the money, right? That you read the Wall Street Journal, Fox News was reporting, okay, so they spent it on laptops because, of course, they want to make sure everybody can do the remote learning. That was number one priority for these teachers. They spent $26 million on safety equipment, medical equipment, masks, air purifiers, other items intended to make schools safer. All the Chicago teachers went to the front of the line when it came to the vaccines when they were still sparse. None of it is enough. None of it will ever be enough.
That's exactly right, Megyn. It'll never be enough because they can always argue as to why they need more money. The way that I've put it before is that underperforming private schools shut down. Underperforming government schools get more money. Why? Because they can say, well, we're underperforming and failing because we don't have enough money, even though since 1960 in the U.S., we've increased per pupil education expenditures by 287% after adjusting for inflation. That's before all the COVID bailouts. We'll see when the data come out on that. But we're seeing individual districts increasing per pupil education expenditures over the past couple of years in places like Los Angeles, where the data has already surfaced, by about 60-70% over a couple of years. It's just absolutely horrendous. And if you look at how they're spending the money in places like Los Angeles, the district officials laid out a plan a few months ago, and they pointed out that 6% of their student population has left. There's this mass exodus occurring from the government school system right now because a lot of parents are fed up with it. And the remote learning, we really shouldn't even call it remote learning because the kids aren't learning all that much. If you look at the data on that from McKinsey and Company and so many other studies on the topic, we should call it remote instruction, if anything, or maybe remotely learning because you're not learning all that much. The school closures have hurt kids academically and in other ways too, mentally, physically. We've seen obesity in children increase substantially over the past a year and a half. And we've seen teenage suicide attempts increase by about 31% over the past year and a half. It's just absolutely horrendous that they're still playing this school closure card to use that as leverage for even more money from the taxpayer. And there's no real way out of it except for bottom up accountability. If your grocery store closes, you can take your money elsewhere. If a Walmart closes for whatever reason, or if the employees go on strike, as a customer, I can take my money to Trader Joe's or Safeway or Harris Teeter. But when your public school closes, families are stuck in between this tug of war between the district and the union, and the customer feels all the pain in the current government school system. That's the problem here. And thankfully, it's finally being exposed for the nonsense that it is. There's this messed up set of incentives that are baked into the government school system where they get your money regardless. And in fact, the worse they do, they can actually profit from that. And we're seeing that play out with the school closures. And the way that I put it before is that COVID didn't break the government school system. It was already broken.